Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for our 11th and final webinar in this series, titled Owning Your Home. We'll be discussing the board's role in successful development. And for the last time, here's a little background on the House of Development. The House of Development is a concept developed by Cogio to illustrate the building blocks of a successful organization and explain why development is so crucial to fundraising, recruiting, and achieving your organization's goals. My name's Whit Godden, and I am the Director of Strategic Marketing over here at TAP Network. TAP Network is a digital marketing and technology agency that strives to support nonprofits through accessible and innovative marketing technology solutions and strategies. I'll be monitoring the webinar along with introducing our main speaker today, and also providing some insights on how to use technology to deal with moves assessment and drive nonprofits' mission awareness and increase membership engagement. We will be taking some questions at the end, so desktop viewers feel free to submit those questions through the chat option on the GoToWebinar interface. If you're dialed in, unfortunately you won't be able to submit questions, but included in the slides today, as well as the follow-up email, you will have our contact information and are more than welcome to reach out to either Rob or myself. And now on to our main speaker. Rob Kusel is the Managing Director of Cogio. Cogio provides organizational advice and development services to nonprofits to optimize their efficiency and long-term sustainability. He's worked with organizations such as Essex and Drake Fundraising Council, Blue Oak School, Stanford University, and his alma mater, Williams College. Now, I'll be handing it off to Rob.
Thanks, Whit. Hello, everyone. So why don't we go to the fourth slide, and this is representative of owning the house, right? And today we're going to really explore the board's role in particular across each room, as well as the concept of a strategic retreat in terms of making sure that you've got the right board composition and the right strategic imperatives against which to fundraise. And that's really the theme today. So the next slide, goals and context for today. So board roles, better understanding, awareness and understanding of the planning processes and procedures required of the board to be successful with fundraising development activities. Evaluation. How do you analyze and evaluate your organization's current board leadership practices? Activity. The board's roles and responsibilities within each room of the House of Development. So this is neat because we're actually going to give you the exact tactics which the board should be leveraging per each room, and including the most important, which will be bolded out. Planning. How performing periodic strategic retreats is vital to the overall success of the board's role within the concept, the House of Development. And then, as Whit pointed out, data management, the relevance of technology and data to the board's development activities. Next slide is a study that was done by the Graduate School of Business, e.g. Business School at Stanford University. And it was a comprehensive survey on leadership and management in the 501c3 nonprofit sector. And it turned out, no surprise here, that the greatest struggle areas for the 501c3 are board governance and fundraising. And by board governance, it can mean anything from recruiting the right proper board member, as well as implementing the bylaws and adhering to the bylaws, including term limits, etc. So 56 and 52%. Now let's think about that. Why would that be the most difficult? Well, candidly, these are the two areas where you really have to have activity, and you have to have tactics, and you've got to have discipline, and you've got to have agendas. And so the really important thing is to be disciplined in that approach as it comes to development and the board's involvement in development, and we'll cover that, but most importantly, in creating the proper board through proper board governance tactics. So let's start with the strategic retreat. Why? Why consider it, particularly if your agency has not done one in the last 5 years? This is something you need to be doing. So what is a strategic retreat? It's a dedicated session for the board, key stakeholders, and select staff to perform a process to evaluate and determine the agency's strategic imperatives and priorities for the short term, 1 year, and then longer term, 5 years out. This process includes performing a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat, both internal and external facing. And then analyzing the SWOT analysis results, and therefore from that restructuring board level subcommittees to make sure that each strategic imperative is prioritized and being addressed over the course of the year. Last, it's vital to perform a strategic basis on a consistent basis, as I mentioned, with a maximum of 5 years between agency retreats. You've got board turnover, you've got perhaps different priorities, etc. It sets the vision, direction, and relevant actions for the subsequent years and optimizes the process toward maximizing agency goals. And this is the case. The next slide talks about the components of a strategic retreat. Most importantly, the SWOT analysis. Let me give you more background prior to getting into what the SWOT analysis accomplishes, but rather talk about a general agenda for a retreat. We do them in half day. Generally, it starts with introductions. Then it's a macro overview delivered by the executive director and or the chairman of the board. That takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes, so that everybody's on board and really speaking from the same script. Questions are answered if there are any. And then the SWOT analysis is performed, and that can be done any number of ways, in groups or having the whole group at once. Once that's done, the results are analyzed by the consultants, summarized, and disseminated for everybody to observe. And then the results are given, and after further analysis, the consultant within that 4-hour framework then makes recommendations surrounding standing meetings that need to be considered, as well as ad hoc meetings, which also might be considered. And the takeaway is for the board members to think about which subcommittees, now that they've been defined, they want to staff and or chair particularly. But we'll get into that a little more detail on the next slide. Now, the SWOT analysis, up until 3.5 months ago, generally was done in board meetings in person. Over the last 3.5 months, we've been doing them virtually, which has actually been a plus, ironically. Now, let's think about that. Why would it be a plus to have a virtual strategic retreat? Well, here's the irony. If you look at the components of a strategic retreat on a metaphysical scale, it's 100% meta. You want people thinking. You know, physically it doesn't matter. And as a matter of fact, by doing it virtually, there are no distractions, such as people getting up from the table, going to the bathroom, or checking their phones, and which distracts somebody else. And it was we did one for Compatible Land Foundation last month, and it was ironically the most efficient retreat we've ever had. It took 2 hours and 13 minutes in total. And the report we just submitted is 41 pages and full of great recommendations. So what is a SWOT analysis? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, internal and external. And here you really want to emphasize to the board that they need to be absolutely objective in bringing out these issues. Okay, there's nothing to hide here. Then, as I mentioned, those all get output, summary overview, preliminary findings review, and then, as I mentioned, the strategic priorities and executive summaries, determine subcommittees, ad hoc, which means that it can be staffed with outsiders, and it generally has a term limit. Standing means it's board only, and it's really about the frequency of meeting that comes into play. And then you'll want to staff each subcommittee and determine frequency of meetings I mentioned. And the critical thing here is the intellectual property of the board members. The expertise of the board members within the subcommittees need to match up what the subcommittees are trying to accomplish. Next slide. So here's a typical outcome. The sub-strategic, after the strategic retreat. I'll give you a framework on the left. You've got the board of directors and the board of trustees, generally set up with the president or chair, vice president, vice chair, secretary, treasurer. These represent now the executive committee, which is one of the subcommittees, standing subcommittees below. Then you've got members at large, and then also the other category would be the emeritus. And emeritus are life members individuals that are really valuable, that have massive affinity, generally have named you in their will, and bring value to the meetings. However, they generally don't have a vote, although that does vary. And then the subcommittees that we see most frequently aligned, and there can be more, in terms of standing subcommittees, we see definitely executive committee, which is again the officers and the head of school or the executive director and the CEO, as well as the board governance committee, which is the committee which recruits and retains board members as well as mentors, et cetera. The development committee, fundraising committee, finance committee, and then if there is a facility, buildings and grounds or facilities committees. And there can be others. We've seen programmatic committees, et cetera. Ad hoc committees, again, are time limited, specific in what they're trying to accomplish, and project based in terms of what they're assessing. Now, on the right-hand side, proper board development, really, it's about being objective in terms of now that you've got the strategic imperatives and you know what you'll be doing as in subcommittee work, you know what type of board members you'll want. So assess your current composition through a board matrix. And if, Will, I don't know, do you want to click on the sample matrix? Are you able to do that?
Yep.
Forget about it. If you want to see a sample matrix, just email us and we'll forward you one. And there may actually be one somewhere. What's that?
I think I'm sharing it right now, actually, the spreadsheet.
Okay, good. Well, okay, great. So yeah, it's a spreadsheet and you can see it's pretty basic. What you've got are, on the left-hand side, you've got names of individuals currently on the board. And then below there, you've got prospects, potential prospects, and then numbers by their names, which represent qualities, right? Do they have skills in marketing, law, engineering, environment, et cetera? And you want to, again, be very objective on what you have and what you're looking for. So this helps you manage the process. It's very, very helpful. And it should be aggressively managed. Let's go back to slide 9. Once you've created that board matrix, you want to identify the IP intellectual property gaps. Where are the expertise gaps? And then once you know where those gaps are, identify key leaders that would help fill those gaps. The strategic retreat, which I just mentioned, the board was very honest with itself in that if they were going to do what they were set to accomplish post-strategic retreat, they don't have a board that's really equipped for external affairs as much as it should be. And they realize that. And so now they're going to commit to this process and really building a board that has more of a external affairs composition. And then board composition optimization, again, identify, recruit, then you want to onboard and have a mentoring program. If you're not doing that, you need to consider that. The best practices is onboarding entire classes, onboarding 2 or 3 trustees at a time in a fiscal year, in the same year. They each are assigned a mentor, and the process is really smooth. There should be a board training manual, probably online now in a PDF format that's easily accessible. There should be board training in terms of don't expect that they've been a board member before, and if they have, the culture may be completely different from your agency's culture. So make sure they understand what the expectations are. And then give them subcommittee assignments from the moment they are joining the board so that they feel integrated as well as part of the team and active from the get-go. And then don't let the board the matrix sit on a shelf or in your computer. Make sure you're looking at it periodically in development committee meetings or board governance committee meetings. Now, the development committee meeting and the board governance committee meeting sometimes overlap. Why? Because really it's about external affairs. So it's okay to actually have those 2 committees overlap, but be sure that you separate the 2 agendas. That's really important. Now I'm going to ask a quiz question, and I'm going to give you about 6 or 7 seconds to think about it. And if you've got the right answer, feel good about yourself. But now that you've heard all this data,
if you're on a desktop, I'll actually be launching a poll for you guys to answer so we can see what the general audience believes is the correct answer. So I was able to set up a poll for this. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Whit. So here's the question. Looking at the standing subcommittee, so take a look at that box on the left, lower left. Right, Executive Committee, Board Governance Committee, Development Committee, Finance Committee, Facilities Committee. Which of these subcommittees is by far the most important subcommittee? 6 seconds.
All right, 3, 2, 1, closed. Shall I give you the winner percentage, or do you want to give it away?
No, I'd like to hear the results first.
For sure. 22% said the Executive Committee, 41% said the Board Governance Committee, 33% said the Development Committee, 4% said Finance Committee, and 0 said Facilities Committee. And 52% of the people voted.
Great. Thank you for voting.
Yeah, thanks.
So the correct answer, and the most of you, 40+% of you got it right, is Board Governance Committee. Why? Because, say for the Executive Committee, which is staffed by the 4 officers and meets only because of emergencies generally, the other committees will be staffed by people that are brought to you by the Governance Committee. And they're the committee who needs to pay attention to the strategic imperatives and make sure this board matrix is managed and that it's being filled with individuals who will actually have the intellectual property and expertise. Great job. Thanks for taking the quiz. And make sure you ask your board when you next see them, see if they get it. So what are outcomes? Positive outcomes. Again, you want good processes. Board terms, renewals. You've got to be very clear about the role of the board chair. The executive director, head of school, president, and board chair relationship. That needs to be a trusting relationship, very much a peer-to-peer relationship. The best boards we've seen is where the head of school or the executive director has been instrumental in bringing that person into the board and subsequently as chair. There needs to be a succession plan. The vice chair is not necessarily the next chair. It generally is, but that needs to be addressed at all times. And we highly recommend for board meetings the concept of a consent agenda coupled with subcommittee reports. Much more efficient, and certainly those who do it love it. And then you can have expert speakers if you'd like. Now, board duties, to be sure, the board members have 2 duties. The first is to oversee the executive director, and the second is the financial well-being of the agency, the fiduciary responsibility, namely development. Let me be clear, 2 duties: hire and fire the executive director, as well as evaluate, and then external affairs. And that is it. All of the staff within the agency reports to the head of school, the CEO, or the president, or the executive director. Nobody reports to the board but the head of the agency. And that needs to be absolutely crystal clear to board members, because oftentimes board members will meddle into programmatic, they will meddle with staff, and that is absolutely wrong and unhealthy, and it creates an informal organization that just cannot be present. And I really want to stress that. Okay, now this is interesting because we're going to look at each, let's go to the next slide. We're going to look at each of the rooms within the House of Development. I'm going to talk about what happens offline, and then if relevant, Whit is going to give you some tools and technology right after. So we're going to stream bottom up. So what's the role of the board member in annual and membership giving? The most important is that they make an annual contribution, because you can't go after foundation grants without 100% board participation for the most part. They should assist with stewardship when asked, and they should cultivate potential donors and members into the agency sphere. Next slide, Whit.
Yeah, and so in order for the board members to actually achieve these things, you'd be surprised, but there's some pretty fundamental, simple, but often potentially overlooked components and pieces of technology that the board needs in order to succeed at stewarding and assisting and cultivating potential donors and members. So the first is, do you have all of the correct and active links? As a technology agency, you'd be surprised how many inquiry calls we have where people have broken links, donate buttons that don't work. So it's a challenge for the board members to help steward or assist with cultivating potential donors if those links are not available or active. Secondly is messaging and communications. Email addresses and how you are messaging those emails to potential donors, members, and the ability to continue to assist with that stewardship is vital, but often overlooked and not always an easily accessible piece of the puzzle. And lastly is engagement and access to external documents. It's one thing to say something, it's another thing to actually be able to show it. Do you guys have the correct external documents to engage through the stewardship process and through the cultivation process, at this level of the house? So I'll send it back to Rob to go into the next room.
Okay, now we're on slide 13. Thanks, Whit. For events, now we're on the lower right, the events room. Again, first floor, remember, is retail, unrestricted giving for the most part. They have 4 roles. The most important is evaluate the return on investment, the ROI of the event. Right? That is the board's role because staff, they want it to succeed, and they may even be in denial if it's not that great a return on investment. So that's the board's role. Is this worth our time, given the amount of resources that are being dedicated and the funds that are actually being raised at this particular event? Monitor the number of events that occur. Too many events is probably not a great thing. So that's the role of the board, the most important role. The other 3 would be to host or attend an event when possible. Host in particular cultivation event if you're in a campaign or a major gift effort. At the event, they should contribute to the event if it's an in-kind or whatever, and then they should purchase something at the event, whether it's silent auction, whether it's sponsoring somebody for a thon. That's their job, is to actually participate. And then assist with stewardship post-event when asked by the Office of Development. That's really important that they really listen to the Office of Development or the Executive Director or the volunteer team that ran the event. If it's a PTA or whatever, the board needs to be a team player in that post-event. That's it for slide 13.
Great. And to speak to the event side of things and particularly evaluating your ROI, it's a very challenging thing to evaluate the ROI of a live event and even a virtual event. But virtual events, given the current state of things, are going to become much more and more the norm. And you'll see platforms coming up that are going to be providing really seamless and streamlined and engaging ways for you all to have your events online, your fundraising events online. And this, I think, from our perspective over at TAP, we've seen this really play out positively in 2 primary focuses. One is the integration of social media and engagement at these events. So it's almost like you're already, connected on that digital platform. So it's not much of another step for people to begin to engage with their own networks about the organizations that they're currently attending a virtual event online and sharing why they care about your organization, why they care about this particular project or they're passionate about this particular mission. And then it also allows for an elevated engagement of the individual attendees as well, which could also lead into more gamified fundraising tactics or opportunities to really, again, cultivate the post-event stewardship and conversations with opportunities that have been sort of integrated into that digital platform. The second side that we see a lot of really benefit around the virtual events is you've got a very, if you are able to integrate directly to your CRM through your Eventbrite platform and things like that, you're able to really monitor potential engagement by individual participant. So you're already getting sort of like who is actionable, who is the person who's asking the most amount of questions or providing the most amount of information or engaging the most at a particular virtual event Funneling all of that information into your CRM database is going to help you build out your strategy and start to segment and focus on who are the people that you really should be cultivating, who are those people that you really should be stewarding based off of their natural habitual relationship and sort of conversation with your organization. So this slide could probably become a whole entire presentation, which I've actually done in the past, but I tried to summarize it in two, I think, really vital pieces of technology and tools that you can integrate into your events to really make sure you're maximizing your ROI to further your goals. All right, so slide 15.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Not yet, actually, because I want to give everybody a subject. No, not at all. I just want to give everybody a subjective example of what we're doing, let's say, with the client in Oakland, California, in terms of preparing and planning for what we're calling a virtual cultivation event for their major gift effort. And how are we doing it? Well, what we're doing is we're mirroring offline methodologies. We've got two co-hosts, so they're going to be the virtual co-hosts. We're leveraging a platform that can have many, many people on it, and very robust. And then we're charging the board with identifying 20 to 30 individuals, if they can, that would benefit from this. And everybody's on board. Everybody's in. And so we're planning for an early July virtual cultivation event. And the feeling is that attendance will be strong. And then to Whit's point, then you've got great stewardship potential. You'll know exactly who attended, and you can follow up by doing either a major gift meeting with a walk, or if your state is calming down, you can actually meet in person with social distancing. Or what we're doing with many of our clients now, we're doing virtual calls, major gift calls, which is working well as well. So just wanted to give you all some subjective examples of methodologies that are already in place as we're dealing with this hopefully ephemeral crisis. So now let's move over to slide 15. Now we're moving up to the second floor, corporations and foundations. For these two, the most important thing board members can do is cultivate and engage if they know the corporate or the foundation, individuals within those entities. That's their job, to engage. Otherwise, they should identify qualified prospects, dinner conversations, things, networking, etc. If asked, they should introduce the corporation or the foundation to the agency. They should assist the CEO, head of school, executive director on visits and solicitations, play the board member role, where the head of the agency will do make the solicitation. And then they should augment on stewardship again where it's relevant, particularly if they made the introduction. Point is, if let's say you introduce company A to the agency, that goes well, an investment is made either in kind or cash, the formal thank you will go to company A, but the board member should also be asked to, or at least make it known to the board member that this occurred and encourage the board member to augment on that stewardship. That's a good example, a good particular example of how that works. So why don't we move to next slide?
Yep. So if any of you guys have seen these presentations in the past with me on here, you'll know I always use this as this pretty much is functional in any room, but I felt this was really important for the cultivation of sort of the corporate and foundational relationships, because two sides, right? Rob just spoke. Ensure that there is the best ones are if you qualified and you would know that there's an existing relationship. So within a foundation's particular profile in your CRM, tracking who knew who from this particular foundation is going to be vital. The second thing, I've been on a board many times, but one board every year it's the same question: who do we go to? Who do we go to? Who should be our corporate partners? And sometimes there will be someone said, well, 10 years ago, this person, this organization, or this corporation donated. I wonder if they would be interested in doing it again. So keeping your relationship management tool, your customer or contact relationship management tool clean and up to date is going to make that process for you to identify and cultivate and continue to engage them these corporate and foundations so much more efficient and effective. It's going to save you guys a lot of time. So a CRM tool is vital at every step, but I felt this was just a really great place to sort of put that in the pocket. So moving on to slide 17.
Yeah, and highly relevant for 17, 18, 19, the next three slides.
Yes.
So 17, now we're moving up to this. We're in the middle room of the second floor, and major gifts. And your reaction should be, wow, many more bullet points here. Indeed, this is where board members can really make a difference. And when we help agencies create boards, this is the room we look at in terms of their true potential, given their duties. We're currently building out a board for a for-profit that decided to put together a foundation. And this is exactly what we're looking at. And the number one, the most vital thing they can do, they're all important, but the most important is to connect. Connect to others with financial capacity to the agency. That's their principal duty. We're not asking them to ask for money. That's ahead of the agency's job, because there's something called blowback effect. And blowback effect is board member asking somebody to consider an investment to their campaign. And asking somebody, now this somebody just happens to be on the YMCA board locally. And this somebody may answer, sure, board member, I'll give to your campaign, but I want you to consider giving to the YMCA campaign. Let's blow back. Can't do that with an executive director or a head of school or a CEO or a sub-president. So that's really important, but the board members certainly can connect and join in meetings. What are the other roles? If capacity is there within the family, consider not just an annual gift, but a major annual gift, a stretch gift. And the formula, the adage is this. If you join a board, you should give at the highest level wherever you're giving elsewhere. So if somebody, for example, is a graduate of the University of Tennessee and is really enamored with the baseball program there and gives $5,000 annually, right? That's what they need to consider at your agency. That is the formula. I mentioned connecting, reviewing wealth screening lists. Once you've got your wealth screening list returned, you need to run it by every single board member and even past board members so that they can help qualify. Now that you've got the quantification done on the analysis, now it's time to qualify them, particularly if you don't know them well, those individuals with wealth. Have them review the annual case statement if you're not in a capital campaign. Host a cultivation event if they have the right assets and the right mindset. Attend cultivation events. Join executive director or head of school, president, CEO in major gift meetings. Augment on stewardship. And this is really important in major gifts because this is where you want to differentiate yourself from other agencies. And if they're giving you a major gift, the board member, they may be doing it elsewhere. Certainly board members can help with that stewardship and really making sure that there are multiple thank yous going out to ensure that you're stewarding at the highest level. And this is probably the best tip you can get all session. It's all about stewardship, as you heard last time. And then have the board member engage in moves management where relevant, which is to say, if you know something is important that happened at the agency, maybe the board member is the one who's communicating it to the donor and not you, the director of development or so be intelligent in how you're doing moves management, because it's really important that the right person be the messenger, in other words. So that's that. Now we move to the right into plan giving, and the most important thing a board member can do, and if you have not launched a legacy program, you should, number one, because there's about to be a big pass-through with the baby boomers. But the board member should consider including the board member on whose board she sits with a bequest, codicil will. If tax-wise, consider an IRA rollover. This is also age effective, 70.5 or over. Consider another plan giving vehicle if pertinent and tax-wise. And that's kind of advice you might get from your planning attorney. Be versant in plan giving vehicles. So board members should be able to know the difference between a charitable lead trust and a charitable remainder trust at a minimum. Now, what's a pooled income fund? What does that do? Charitable gift annuity, right? How does that work? So just being versant in plan giving vehicles, because there is a limited number of vehicles. And then if your agency holds one on an annual basis, and if you have a legacy society, you should be doing this because these are your best investors. All board members should attend the plan giving luncheon, networking as leaders of the agency and demonstrating to those investors that are present that there is strong leadership and that their investment, e.g. will actually be really good for sustainability of the agency. The next slide is capital campaign. Again, more bullet points because board members will make a difference in a successful capital campaign. If you're not in a capital campaign, your house has a flat roof. It's that simple. But here we're in a capital campaign, make that assumption, and therefore board members have to shift gears and take on a little more capacity. The two most important things they can do is, number one, invest at the highest capacity potential over a multi-year period. And then two, join the campaign steering committee. The way we set up campaign steering committees much beyond the board, because there are individuals who are not on the board, who might not be on the board, who can be invaluable in terms of the overall success of the campaign. Again, capital campaign, you will be doing well screening, same thing, review. Review the capital campaign case statement. Have them help you identify steering committee members that are not board members. Attend all campaign events if available. Potentially host or co-host a campaign cultivation event. And then again, much like in major gifts, augment on donor stewardship where relevant and or instructed. Let's go to the next slide now.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Yes, of course. So this has been something we've talked about in past, webinars as well, but I think this is a really important moment in the presentation today to sort of talk a little bit about the difference between landing pages and microsites. I think this got a lot of traction last month as well, but this is a really great opportunity to support primarily your capital campaign, but I think it's an important thing to look at major gifts and planned gifts and even transformational gifts for that matter as we get further along into the house. But a landing page versus a microsite. So a landing page is one single sort of more transactional place, right? It might be your donation page that you send a particular individual to for maybe a smaller donation. But if you have a larger sort of campaign, or you're really trying to build out a larger or a more robust strategic approach, you may decide to look at building what's called a microsite around a particular project or around a capital campaign. And this really allows for a deeper dive, experiential sort of discovery as to exactly what it is that your organization does, what this particular campaign is all about, what are the current benchmarks that you've reached at that moment. You could even build components of it that are really engaging, or announcements, leaders, leaderboards to some degree. You can gamify it if you'd like, but it's really allows for a much more engaging, deeper dive opportunity to really showcase and build awareness and start the conversations around your donorship and around your membership base. So I thought it would be just interesting and helpful for us to revisit what those two components are. And if anyone has any questions about how to build those, feel free to follow up with me at the end via email. But I think that this is a really great opportunity and to Rob's point, like this is something that you could really start today or tomorrow if it's what you're looking to sort of build into your current strategy. So I'll pass it along to Rob to get to the stewardship.
Thanks, Whit. Right, so the stewardship slide, really two roles need to be considered here. If the board member is on the development committee, which is generally where stewardship is being assessed and positioned, put in place, just make sure that best practices are in place. I'll give you an example. Let's say an agency receives an online transaction. The transaction comes in, and as we know, by law, we have to provide a receipt with the FEIN number. And so the email engine has an auto receipt generated. If So if the board member is on the development committee and she hears that this is the process and the only thing going out is an automated email that's highly unpersonal, she should be very upset as a board member that that is not even close to best business practices. Because in addition to the automated email, there needs to be even a handwritten thank you note, particularly if it's a large transaction. At the very least, another email from the director of development or the head of the agency. And then, as we talked about earlier, if relevant, particularly given the importance of the transaction, augmented with the board level stewardship and any other, could be faculty level, it could be programmatic level, head of a program, etc. So that's what I'm talking about here. It's really important that be addressed. And so when you leave this call today, the first thing you want to do is check into your stewardship practices, particularly those that are digital, because that's where we see the biggest gaps. And then the other one we've talked a lot about, the other role is to assist with stewardship when requested and where it makes sense. The next slide, the transformational gift. So what's the role of the board here? Here's what we know from the last session. There are two types of transformational gifts, right? There's the one like the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco, where the multimillionaire from Seattle, who was denying that he was blind for his entire life, decided to leave his entire estate to the Lighthouse, $187 million. He had never been to the Lighthouse for the Blind. The Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco never heard of him. There was no relationship whatsoever. Yet why did he choose them? Because technology. They are the ones developing all the great technologies that are benefiting blind people, mostly through their phones, right? So applications that will guide them through BART's metro systems, applications that will guide them through airports, train stations. Uber has been a huge, Lyft and Uber have been a huge boon for the blind community and the visually disabled community. And so that transformational gift occurred because this individual did his research and he was told San Francisco is the place. And so he didn't give it to the Seattle Lighthouse, he gave it to the San Francisco Lighthouse. So that's the one. So for that, you want to make sure that the agency is optimizing activities per its mission, optimizing as in producing the best possible programs. Whit mentioned that I spent time at Stanford University heading up major gifts. Now, why do people keep investing in Stanford at the rate they do? They've got a multi-billion-dollar endowment. Well, because people view it, particularly alums and businesses, as a great investment, as a sustainable investment. Ditto with Harvard and Yale. You know, we're still, and so that's why they have an advantage, because they are performing at the elite level and therefore beneficiaries of massive bequests over generations, which we know there's a huge correlation between endowment growth and bequest generation. The second type of transformational gift is a generational donor, a donor who has given for literally 40 years, is of that age, and really wants to leave a legacy. We talked about the Joan Kroc estate, McDonald's Harris. It's a great example. Jackie Onassis, Kennedy Onassis, another great example of a charitable league trust that she did, that Martha's Whole. Several agencies on the East Coast benefited tremendously for 20 years. And why? Because those agencies, whether it was NPR, whether it was the hospice in San Diego, whether it was the East Coast Oceanic agencies, cultivated both Joan Kroc and Jackie O. And so that's why you want to ensure that best stewardship practices are leveraged, because oftentimes you do not know who is that large bequest is, right? Because she is sitting with her financial advisor who's saying, hey, well, if we're in fact going to include a charitable intention as part of your will and your estate, which nonprofit do you want to include in this estate planning? And unbeknownst to you, they may select your agency because of the great work you had been doing in stewarding her as a donor over the 20 to 30 years. And that happens a lot. When I was behind a desk at Hotchkiss, this is oftentimes we didn't know. And certainly at Stanford, that was the case as well. So again, really important to have great mission and great optimization of activities per the mission, and then high-level stewardship for multi-year donors in particular, if not multi-decade donors. So next slide, Whit is going to talk about his digital conclusions.
Yep, my digital conclusions for sure. Yeah. Yep. CRM is your best friend. Anywhere from annual membership giving all the way to stewardship, it allows you to know your audience and connect with the right people at the right time and maintain that personalization that is really, really key and fundamental, honestly, in any sector at this point, at this day and age. Mobile friendly is key. So ensuring that your website and all of your digital footprints are accessible and that they're in the palm of your donor. This allows them to engage with your organization on many different levels. Consider, we've had a couple nonprofits approach us in the last month or two, pivoting a lot of their marketing and digital budgets into building applications that are going to help elevate hopeful engagement and showcase impact for funding. So really think about where we're headed and what's available, and particularly in the application world, you'd be surprised what's affordable in these days. Communicate and showcase. So ensuring that you have regular and consistent email, website updates, social media. Showcase what you're doing on a regular basis. Always find that story, but don't just tell it. Make sure you show it. Through pictures or videos, infographics, motion graphics. Make sure that, if you are looking for that transformational gift, how do you show the general public that you are the best at what you do, so that you get to be the next lighthouse, you get that next $500 million bequest. And last but not least, of course, is to stay current and consistent. So communicate through your newsletters, making sure that your web pages are up to date, adding new web pages, looking at microsites, what is the most current and up to date kind of digital opportunities that are going to help leverage and grow your impact, while also mitigating sort of overhead. And then of course blogging. Blogging is a good old, very traditional, but still very good way of doing what we call inbound marketing. It's an opportunity to get your nonprofit's story or mission into the face of many, many people. So those are my digital conclusions, and I'll hand it back to Rob to highlight his key takeaways here.
Great, thanks, Whit. And then we'll take questions. So this is an important slide. So the key takeaways are the following. Fundraising development success can be significantly enhanced with the board's ongoing participation. Now, what we're not saying is it's the board's responsibility to fundraise. No, not at all. As a matter of fact, when we hear either from clients, but it generally doesn't happen with clients because of the vetting we do, but if I hear at a speech or wherever, if I hear, hey, our board won't fundraise, we just can't do it. They won't do it, right? Well, who do we put the blame on? Straight on the agency. Why? Because one, they didn't select the right individuals, right? So they didn't do a good job with what we talked about earlier in the webinar. Two, they're not trained properly. Three, they're asking the wrong things of them. They're not organizing them properly. They don't have a strong development marketing plan, a MarCom plan. And it's really the fault of the agency head for not ensuring that the elements of the board are as we just described in terms of how they're behaving from room to room in that context. And so when we hear that, we say, no, wrong. It's really your fault. And we don't say it that way, but that's pretty much our messaging. And so I really want to be clear that the board can enhance the external activities, but it's not their responsibility. The responsibility lays square on the head of school, on the shoulders of the head of school, as well as anybody involved on staff in development, and the consultants, if there are consultants who are engaged as well. Next takeaway, board members should seriously consider participating in every room of the House of Development that is currently in play at the agency, because you may not all be doing all of the stuff, right? Particularly if you're in a capital campaign, the major gifts program generally gets not suspended, but it just has a different priority. So that's really important. Whichever rooms you're actually tactically engaged in, they need to participate across the board. Now, to be sure, and we see this with all the boards we work with, it's generally 20 to 30% of the board that really will do the work. And just know that that is the case, that it's not just your board. But the net is focus on those individuals that will do, make other board members see how to achieve success, and they'll engage. Next takeaway, good governance, planning, and execution are keys to success. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of discipline. There's got to be accountability, there have to be agendas, there have to be meetings, there have to be agenda-driven meetings. Absolutely has to be disciplined in the process. For example, when we work with our clients, the first thing we do is we mandate a standing weekly meeting. We pick a time, an hour, and we have a standing meeting. And for that, we have to leverage 3 different conference lines, but it works. And that creates accountability. Now, on some days, some weeks, it's 30 minutes. Others, it may an hour and a half to 2 hours. It really varies on what's being driven in terms of the agenda. But again, the discipline factor is absolutely critical. And that's why this whole alignment of subcommittees, et cetera, that we discussed earlier, really is key, that there is discipline. Another key takeaway, if you don't have the expertise in-house or the discipline in-house, get help. Get outside professional help to facilitate that planning process. And why? Because you'll get objectivity and expertise. Generally, from what we see, particularly in agencies that have not been doing comprehensive development for a generation or more, the comprehensive House of Development process is generally new to most board members. So they really benefit from getting the expertise if it's not. And by the way, for capital campaigns, the formula is this. If an agency has no staff that has led a capital campaign, you absolutely have to get outside help. And this is not, I'm not trying to be the sales guy here. It's just a very important recommendation. The reason why Stanford doesn't hire consultants is because everybody there is overqualified for the most part. And so you've got to be very objective in assessing, 1, your readiness, and then 2, make sure you've got the proper leadership and the expertise, intellectual property, for the planning process. And then finally, here's our last recommendation, key takeaway. If it's not, the development report of the subcommittee should be at the top of the board meeting agenda, okay? It should be the first item discussed: development, external affairs, and board governance, marketing. Why? Because 1, the board members will understand that it's important and that they have to play a role. Generally, what we see is that until we show up, it gets relegated to the end because nobody really wants. It's the only area where work has to occur. All the other board agenda items is really intellectual property that's really pushing emails around for the most part, or texts or whatever. Development and board governance, again, as we talked about with the Stanford University survey, it's the most challenging. So you put it at the top of the agenda, you deal with it, you have an agenda-driven meeting, and it's very much activity-oriented and tactically oriented, and people will take it much more seriously. The other thing is, we know that board meetings tend to be in the evening, which is people are not as fresh, and therefore having it at the end of the meeting is not good because there's fatigue sets in. And so we strongly urge you to look at your board agenda, your general meeting agenda, check the placement of development, and urge the agency head to consider pushing it to the top, unless you've got some critical issue, which we all do now. Obviously, it's been a stress on. It should be near the top. So that's it, Whit.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. Well, we definitely have some awesome questions from the audience. And I wanted to start off with this one. I believe this is reference to the strategic retreat. The audience member said, this sounds like the basics for a strategic plan. Is this the same as a strategic planning workshop for the board and staff? So I think they're looking for a little bit of a difference between maybe what the strategic planning workshop is compared to the strategic retreat. Are they the same? Are they similar? And does it include staff ever?
Yeah, the strategic retreat we're talking about here really pertains to external affairs and external affairs only. An agency-wide strategic planning session can be longer because you have to explore all of the programmatic elements, et cetera. And so, yes, in that case, you would want to involve staff across the entire agency if you're dealing with an agency-wide retreat. For the external affairs component, you definitely want anybody involved in marketing, development, communication, and head of the agency. Great question.
Okay. Yeah. So the next question from an audience member is, I guess, what is the best or the most learned from failure in fundraising that you've seen or experienced?
Well, there are many potential pitfalls, but mostly stewardship, because donors expect it. You know, as we learned, there's 7 types of philanthropists. Some of them will tell you they don't want recognition. They're not telling the truth. Everybody wants recognition, even the socialite and the dynast. So recognition is the key. Proper recognition and timely recognition is the key to not failing. And anytime, that's a great question. Anytime we see failure across the board, and I don't care what tactic it is, it's always tied to a lack of communication, where there's been a break of communication and therefore it's led to failure across the board, whether it's family issues, business, development. Absolutely. Let me give you a great example since we have time. You guys will get a kick out of this one. When I was at Stanford, we were able to secure a meeting with Dick Kovacevic, who at the time was CEO of Norwest Bank, which is now Wells Fargo. And their headquarters, and Dick was an undergraduate alum, as well as a baseball player, as well as a graduate of the School of Business. So we were able to secure a meeting in Minneapolis, and I was supposed to go there with Condoleezza Rice, who was then provost. She got called away because of Bush, blah, blah, blah. So I ended up going to this meeting alone. Now, background, Dick was on the overseers of the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. That's like being a board member, okay? And so he was regularly in touch. And here's what happened. I go to his office. They let me into his main office. And he looks up from his desk, and he calls me basically a swear word. The arrogance of Stanford. How could I show up? And he's yelling at me, literally, and I have no idea why. Utter failure. Now, what happened? Communication. Here's what happened. His kid was a senior in college, applying to graduate schools of business around the country. He applied to all the top schools, including Stanford. He got in everywhere, including Yale and Harvard and Tuck. The only school that rejected him, Stanford. Dick was a board member. He had just learned the day before his kid called him that he was rejected. They'd never called Dick. The dean of Stanford Business School didn't even call the chairman of Wells Fargo, then Norwest, to give him that news, right? So I go in blindsided, and we had a $2 million proposal for him, and I was out of his office in 1 minute, literally. And if you look at the hierarchy of all this, the resignation of the dean of the law school happened soon thereafter, and it was all tied to this. So that's a great example. Sorry for taking so long, but I thought you should hear that, because again, the failure was directly tied to communication, and in this case, it was probably the most humiliating moment I ever had. And luckily, Condi wasn't there, because I would have been in trouble. So what did I do? I called the vice president at Stanford, explained to him what happened. He then called up to the president, who called down to the dean, and they, obviously that didn't go well, and the rest is history. So that's just a great example. Do we have time for another question? I think we do.
It's 4:30. We can do one more. Yeah, we got one more. Let's do, my board won't fundraise. What should I do?
Yeah. And the other one around that is we're so small that we don't have any subcommittees, our board. So let me address those two because they kind of go hand in hand. So look, we talked about that they have two duties. One is to hire and fire the ED, evaluate the ED or the CEO, and the other is fiduciary responsibility. And they're not there to push paper or to talk about programs, right? For the most part, that's their duty. So make fundraising an obligation, and you can do that through an individual fundraising plan that each board member is required to fill out. Number of connections, annual gift, it's all the elements of a fundraising, individual fundraising plan. Bring in consultants to train them. And another example I have of where this occurred, right, was generally it's an agency that loses government funding, and it's happening more and more, that now has to either shut down, merge, or turn to fundraising for the first time, really. And we worked with an agency like this in the mid 2010, I think it was. It was Shelter Inc. in Contra Costa. They were dealing with homeless issues, and sure enough, their largest funder pulled their funding, right? Government funding just went away, and so they had really three choices: shut down the program, merge with Catholic Charities, or start fundraising for the first time. Well, they hired us. We came in and said, okay, here's what's going to happen. The board has got to step up. And we told him at the time, Tim, the CEO, said, look, you're going to have a lot of attrition here, but that's a good thing because then we can bring on people that will want to do that piece, the fundraising. And there were 18 board members. I think we lost 6 immediately. They resigned, which allowed us to identify 6 great individuals. Net is they were able to keep the program afloat, and the agency is now thriving. Now, if the board is too small and you don't feel like it's worth having a subcommittee, really what needs to happen is that strategic retreat, which will then drive the strategic imperatives and define the intellectual property you need. You want to look at your bylaws, board bylaws, see what the maximum number of board members is. If it's too small, you amend that through a simple vote, increase it, and then grow the board over time so that you can have the proper staffing at the subcommittee level the following year. So what you do there is you basically delay the recommendations until you feel like you've got the proper staffing at the board level. You don't delay at the admin level, but certainly in terms of board involvement, full involvement, engagement, that's where you delay. So I'll stop there, Whit.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, it looks like we've actually gone over just a little bit, which is great. It's been a wonderful discussion. Since this is our last and final webinar, we wanted to formally thank all of you for being part of this educational journey with us. So please feel free to reach out to either Rob or myself. We've included here links to both of our calendars in the slides that we will be sending out as an email. Along with the slides, we'll be sending you a link to the library where you can view all of the past webinars we've delivered together. Feel free to watch them in any order that you'd like. They don't have to be seen sequentially. So, this is our last one, and if you have any feedback or any further questions, like I said, please feel free to reach out to us via email or schedule a meeting with either of us. And that's it for today, and we hope that this was helpful and that you enjoy the rest of your week. Stay safe and stay healthy.